Ben, thanks for joining us, man. It's a pleasure to have you here. So maybe just give your background for people and maybe just describe your journey to becoming a storyteller and a comic writer for Marvel and how that journey is now leading you into Web3. Just give us that rundown.
Well, that's a long story. Sit tight. It all began when I was a young lad of 11 years old wanting to make comic books. Well, it is one of those things where I always kind of knew there was going to be an entertainment in some fashion. I loved music, stories. To me, it's sort of all connected. It was always one sort of thing. And whether it was video games, I grew up on D&D, playing, Dungeons and Dragons at a young age, and just like all of that, Magic the Gathering. And comics were just like this larger than life way to see worlds that I could never have really seen. And I think, movies at the time, because I grew up in the 80s and 90s. I'm a, end of Gen X, early, like 1980. So it's a strange time because it was growing up, in the beginnings of internet, where it was mass adopted and really sort of seeing that, because my dad being a computer scientist as well as an artist, so I've sort of in a strange way kind of followed in his footsteps. But what got me into writing comic books was actually doing a documentary on comic books. My journey brought me to film, and in 2000 we had just done a documentary on plus size modeling. So that was interesting because it was like very niche at the time as well. And the team that I was working with, we were very focused on like telling these niche stories. And I'm a young, filmmaker, 21 at the time, owned my own gear, put money to buy my own editing bay and, camera and everything, took all my college money, and went and spent it on that. And, again, that ties back into, kind of my sort of love of where technology allows us to tell stories in ways that we otherwise wouldn't be able to because we're reliant on other people. The system that I bought for $20K at the time, or $15K, well, now you can do on your iPhone. But, 20 years before, it was going to cost you $1 million, and you would have to do it on film. And it was just like a whole other process. So digital filmmaking really opened a lot of doors for us as artists and creatives in the late 90s and early 2000s. So that was really how I got into filmmaking, was because of the explosion of digital technology and digital storytelling and filmmaking. So that was really the beginning. So doing the comic book documentary in 2001, I got introduced to a ton of folks in the comic book business and industry, and went to Comic-Con in 2002, I think it was, with our documentary as filmmakers. So we screened it there in San Diego. And, again, met all these really incredible comic book folks. But I wasn't focused on making comics. I wanted to make movies. I was like, comics, no, it was weird because not to say that I was like snobby about it, but my dream was I wanted to direct movies. I wanted to tell these big stories on big screens. So, I continued down the path of filmmaking and, worked with some incredible filmmakers, mentored by Larry Cohen, who did Phone Booth, but was a maverick of the 70s, 60s, 70s filmmaking, indie filmmaking. Just really was so focused on the film side. But I ended up building a community for people in comic books and film and animation here in LA in 2008, because I saw what was happening with intellectual properties. And I was like, okay, this is happening right now. And the issue in Hollywood is a lack of education. There's a lack of understanding. All these executives and creative execs, that are their bosses are saying, hey, find us the next big thing. I'm going, well, you don't know what the next big thing is or how to tell it if you don't really know who are the people in the community of comic books, and this sort of niche world. So I did that, and it grew and grew. We ended up actually at Comic-Con in 2010, massive panel, standing room only. It became the sort of premier community in Hollywood for anyone in comics, animation, and even gaming. Folks from Blizzard were coming, all across the board. So that then strangely led me to Will.i.am. Like there's a whole other roundabout story to that. Through my friend Lena Headey, who's an actress. She was in Game of Thrones. Is on a new show right now on HBO, and a dear friend of mine. And through her, I ended up meeting Will I Am. And Will basically just was like, hey, man, it was through one of Lena's friends, that I met Will, and he was doing a film. And Will said, I want to take this script and turn it into a graphic novel. And that became Masters of the Sun. I'd never written a comic book. I, knew how to write them. I was a writer. I'm a writer. At the time I was like, been writing screenplays and all sorts of stories, but I had never actually used the format of comic book writing. So my dear friend Jim Kruger, who I had started Comic Book Sunday with, and who was also a professional comic book writer, I reached out to Jim and said, look, man, I got this incredible opportunity. I'd love to bring you in the mix and have you sort of give me the guidelines on how to write a comic book. So, it's always like a hire or bring in people that know better than you, and learn from them. And that was how I did it in film, and that's how I did it in comics. And so that was Masters of the Sun. It was an incredible project. I mean, it was a transmedia project across the board, AR, VR. There was an album, Masters of the Sun, the album came out on Interscope with Black Eyed Peas. So it was a Black Eyed Peas project. Yeah, I mean, it was, if you've never seen anything about it, like look up the Masters of the Sun. I mean, Stan Lee was a narrator. I got to sign my comic for Stan. That was crazy. That's a whole story. I mean, it was an amazing, incredible thing. I mean, here I am, never having written a comic, to all of a sudden, Will hitting me up and going, "Hey Ben, we got a publisher." And I'm like, "Oh, who's the publisher, man?" He's like, "You're not gonna believe it." And I'm like, "Who?" He's like, "Marvel." I'm like, "What?" And it was through Taboo, actually, his relationship over at Marvel, that got us the opportunity to publish with Marvel. But yeah, I mean, we had Rosario Dawson, Ice-T, KRS-One, Rock Kim, Eric B. Like, it was the who's who of the golden era of hip hop. Redman, Slick Rick. I mean, nuts. It was an incredible project, and it was so blessed to be a part of that. And here I am, never having written a comic, to all of a sudden signing at the Marvel booth at Comic-Con, with Black Eyed Peas. And then on a panel with Stan Lee sitting right behind me. I mean,
this is crazy. I just want to read the names and the voices. You got Stan Lee, Jaden Smith, Jamie Foxx, Charlemagne, Queen Latifah, Mary J. Blige, Ice-T, Michael Rappaport, Snoop Dogg, John DiMaggio, Flavor Flav. That's awesome, man. This is so cool.
Not many people actually know, they know that I was, I worked on the Masters. Not many people know Masters of the Sun. We were so ahead of the curve. It was 2017. I mean, I started that project in 2015. Hired the team, put it together, worked with Will on getting it out there, building it. And then it's funny too, because I was in the studio with my son. My son at the time was very young. He was playing Pokemon Go at Will's studio. I had to go do a meeting, and Will's like, "Yo, what are you doing?" He's like, "I'm catching Pokemon." He was like 4 years old. Will's like, "Oh, what is that?" He saw it. And it was like, then we started talking about the AR, and then he went off, and all of a sudden I get a call. "Oh yeah, we got this AR thing we're doing too." And I was like, I wonder if he was inspired by the fact seeing what little Liam, which is funny too, because Will I Am, Liam, and I brought Liam to a signing at when we were at LA Comic-Con, and Liam was sitting next to Will, and Liam started signing people's stuff. And at 6 years old, and I remember this moment where Liam writes Liam, and so someone asked him for Liam, my son, he's wearing the Masters of the Sun shirt, and then Will goes WIL period LIM. Yeah, it was an incredible project, incredible time, and that really, for me, I mean, I've been working in Hollywood for many years, but at that time, that was that sort of moment that pushed me into my next trajectory. And that's where I met Taboo, and how Taboo and I linked up, and then we started working together, and that's been our current journey over at Marvel. Everything from SPIDERMAN, Daredevil that's coming out, in less than a week, 2 weeks, whatever the hell It's been an amazing journey. I mean, there's so many more elements to it, and sort of, but it was Master of the Sun that really sort of, it was the inspiration to getting into blockchain, because at that time I was working over at Millennium Films, and a very good friend of mine, Ruslan, was just getting into sort of crypto and blockchain. And I had heard about it back in 2011, Bitcoin, this, that, the other thing. Didn't fully grasp what like the potential of it was. And then I looked into some other things with music and blockchain. Universal Music Group, I think, was, looking at blockchain and how it could be for artists. So we actually started putting together a transmedia project that was going to be utilizing blockchain, launching with an ICO on an existing IP at Millennium Films. It is called Undisputed. So that was, we're building a game. So we went to Bulgaria. We shot a whole mocap fight sequence. We got all these assets together. We built a game that you would scan just like that. And in AR, the game would pop up. Your characters were going to be NFTs. Like we were building a UFC style NFT fighting game. But 2018 happened, the bear market, crypto crash, ICO bubble pop. And, because it took us so long to get all the assets built and everything ready for market, we just missed that window, for better or worse. So,
where are the assets now?
They're all in Bulgaria, probably on hard drives.
I wouldn't say you missed it. We're still really early, man.
No, I know. But I'm saying, like, at that time, there was a lot of energy for what we were doing. I mean, look, it's something that can always be brought back. Again, I have been on this journey of, I need to focus on my own creative path and my own ownership and my own storytelling, while still obviously doing stories in the large IP. Obviously Marvel helps bring the attention to, what I'm doing, who I am as an artist, as a creative. And it does help in a lot of ways where I can get the messaging out, this is the future. We shouldn't be scared of how blockchain, can be a major component to the future of studio building and storytelling. So, as well as I have an artificial intelligence startup company, we've been building a prototype for the past 2 years. My fingers are in a lot of different pots, tech, creative, living in the midst of it. But at the end of the day, it's storytelling. So, that's all I go back to. Like, it doesn't matter what we have. Tech allows us to connect, and the storytelling is what makes us stay there.
Yeah, no, definitely. And on that topic of AI, and you harped on how back then, what $1 million of equipment, now today, a few applications on your phone can replicate all that, right? So with all this innovation we've seen in AI, with still in motion graphics, stable diffusion, how do you think NFTs can help leverage these opportunities, and like how will storytelling play a role, like you're saying?
Well, it's interesting to bring that up, because I had a really great call last night with a founder of a company called DNA Block. And if you haven't heard of it, definitely check it out. It's an incredible software that they've been building on top of Unreal. They've got a creative suite that basically allows you to, it's called Replicant. The AI that they've built into it for animation, for voice acting, for dialogue development. It's an all-in-one creative suite that can do a lot of really cool stuff. And they have an NFT component that can actually mint out avatars. So they're not just like your PFP, that are just a little picture. You can actually have these three-dimensional avatars. So, that's kind of like, the first time I've seen something that has all these components, because, my vision, has always been transmedia as a word hasn't existed in reality, right? Like 2008, we were all talking about it in Hollywood. Transmedia. Everybody was a transmedia company. This is like, that was the thing to be, was a transmedia company, right? And then it turned over, now like metaverse, and now it's AI, and, there's always a flavor of the week. But, I never got away from the concept of transmedia. And I don't know if it's a great word. I didn't like it. just because I felt like it really sort of missed the bigger picture. But where NFTs exist, look, not even just NFTs, just blockchain. Like, I think people miss the point that blockchain is an accounting system. And what we are missing is accounting. Like, we are missing accountability. We're missing options for truth and veracity. Like, we need to have real truth. If I own something, if I created something, why should I be worrying about, copyrights and this and that? It's going to get even more convoluted as AI comes in, as Midjourney and Stable Diffusion. And, so where does ownership come from? Like, for instance, if everything had been on the blockchain, let's just say every artist had all of their artwork on the blockchain, and the only way to activate their art for Midjourney to train it would have been to access a database of that blockchain, registered artwork. All of a sudden now, Midjourney would have had to utilize all of that artwork, and every piece that you see would have been able to say, that's the breakdown. And every one of those creatives that got referenced for that could potentially make some percentage of that if it goes into commercial use. Like, to me, like, that's would have been incredible, but we missed that. We missed that opportunity, unfortunately. And, unless we go back and sort of deconstruct each image that is being utilized for commercial use, but I don't think we're completely out of that yet. And I think now the thing that artists need to do and creatives need to do is understand that, if they look at how they can put themselves in that sort of registry, they have a much better chance to make mailbox checks. And that's one of my dreams.
But no, what was really awesome and what you mentioned was, and honestly concerning, is how Midjourney is allowing people to use other artists' styles or creations. And like you're saying, it would be really cool if when somebody's style or composition was used, they get a kickback. They're like, oh, you want to use, my type of my designs or like my unique way of making this, like, give me a little percentage. That makes sense.
Right.
That makes sense. And people forget, and like you're saying, people get caught up in the buzzwords with blockchain. They don't realize that it's simply a publicly distributed ledger. And like you're saying, like with accounting, it's simply a ledger that everybody can audit and look at around the world. And you could track who owns what, because every single asset on the blockchain has a unique hash that distinguishes it from every other asset. So if a verified deployer of a collection with a unique hash of an asset, it can't be replicated ever. It could be copied on the blockchain. People can mint the same art piece. However, that hash is going to be different, and it's not going to be by the deployer. So it's like paying homage to the true artist, to the verified creator, is what blockchain is for.
Money.
It's amazing.
Homage is great. Money is better. Artists need money. Like, that's the bottom line. Like, we as creatives, it's so challenging, right? Like, here's a case in point, right? Like, the Hollywood system sits, like, it used to be cash rich with development. Back in the day, in the 80s, 90s, there were these amazing writer deals where you would be on the lot and you'd be paid a ton of money to develop a bunch of stuff for the studio. Now, as the studios basically say, hey, we don't have any money to develop this. We're going to option it. If it works, then we'll buy it. But you could be in an option for 4 years and you might only see 10K. Maybe more, who knows? Like, depending on what level of creative you are, you're not making money to be able to pay your rent, to pay your bills. So it's really destroying this young generation of creatives that had these opportunities before to get into writers' rooms, to get into pitch their stories, to get into the studios and sell their spec scripts. It's dying, if not dead. That's why there's a writer's strike right now happening in Hollywood, because of this fear of AI and the algorithms that the streamers are using to create basically milquetoast garbage. Like, and they cancel good shit, and then the bad stuff that, like, I equate it to the time of reality television, because that was when I got into Hollywood. It was the very beginning of reality TV popping off in the early 2000s. And it was because of the new technology being digital equipment. You could have a Sony F900 or F950 camera, digital, shoot it, edit it in Adobe Premiere or Final Cut or whatever the hell it was, like some really like sort of laptop system. And I mean, obviously back then they were doing everything online with their, the different suites and stuff, but still it was so much cheaper because you had people. And on the dating shows I worked on back in the day, you paid them in food and $100. That was it. Your actors were so cheap. And this is why all of a sudden it blew up, because all of a sudden people were watching it. The Bachelor, Survivor, all these shows were a product of digital technology. The emergence of cheap technology that allowed storytelling at a very sort of, base level, very titillating level, not deep storytelling. This wasn't really, meaningful storytelling in reality was the real world. When MTV did the real world, you were seeing like real interactions. That was the first experiment of reality television. And then all of a sudden exploded into everything being almost viral. So, that's we water cooler talking about who we won on Survivor. We're at a time right now where it's about to happen again. We're going to get a flood of garbage content that is going to be generated by, AI and all sorts of like new technology. And then ultimately we're going to have to shave all that away to get back to the good stuff. But again, this is where large IP live and why people are going to go and say, I trust Marvel. I trust DC. I trust James Cameron. Like those are the big brands. You're going to go and say, I'm going to spend $100 for me and my girlfriend and, whatever, like me and my family to go see that movie. Like you're going to trust the Pixars, the Disneys. That doesn't mean that the stories have to always be from that world, because I see an international shift. I really believe, and I think a lot of people are seeing this, and I've seen this, firsthand, being in the Black Eyed Peas world, working with Taboo, because they launched themselves as more of an international act than they did as domestic. And the reason why they're still going strong for 25 plus years is because they have fans around the world and they don't have to play domestically in order to be able to stay relevant. Right. So it's like, that's the future. Like countries like India, and all over the world, like we're going to start getting new content, the Middle East, new stories. And that to me is where the future's coming. It's not all of the algorithm garbage that Netflix and all these, YouTube creators that are ultimately going to be building. It's going to be great storytellers that are learning the craft and bringing their culture, ideologies, and doing it in a pop culture way. That to me is the future. And I think that's where NFTs, blockchain, all of this are going to be a major component, because they're going to allow for the rails to get us to the metaverse. Like we need to lay the track to this sort of interconnected everything everywhere all at once space. But, we're going to be able to go into those worlds and be able to see that movie or whatever it is, like from a director vision, like one story from one vision or one group of visions. Then you're going to have your fandom visions. Then you're going to have your gaming visions, then the social gaming visions, then it's all going to be tied together from the mechanics of a lore engine. So anyway, this is the stuff where I'm working on.
Yeah. Have you looked into the other side, Bored Ape Yacht Club, Yuga, like the whole storytelling component of what they're creating? Are you familiar with that?
I mean, to some degree. I don't really dive too deep into it, because my issue with it is it's the decentralized system. The problem with Bored Apes is that there is no sort of overarching lore engine that really connects all the characters together, right? So everyone that can take a character can go and do whatever the hell they want, unless they were to come to consensus and say, okay, this is the birth story. This is the origin story. You need a Bible, right? When we do television or any sort of, television especially, you need to have a show Bible, right? And everyone adheres to that Bible, right? So the problem with Bored Apes and any sort of decentralized, especially like other side and Yuga, because a friend of mine, Neil, has been working that. He owns a few Bored Apes. They've been doing some comics with them. They can go off and do their comics. They can make those comics and tell those stories about those Bored Apes, right? But the challenge is like they've now is that canon? Those characters, are they canon? Is every Bored Ape living in a different verse, a different multiverse? They need someone who is a visionary to really guide the storytelling and ultimately bring it all under one sort of engine and figure out the mechanics of it. that's my challenge.
Maybe. Yeah, I mean, I think there's like a fine line between like giving people full IP ownership and saying treat your own story, but then allowing them to do that, but also originating it back to their swamp origin story as well. That's what I'm interested with the other side of seeing. Like they have $500 million in funding in their seed round. So they just hired the Activision, one of the head directors of Activision and one of the head directors of Fortnite to be their top governing directors of the other side, which is pretty impressive to think of what the game is. And I feel like it's going to be a cross between Fortnite and Minecraft, where people can have their own land in the metaverse where they can mine resources and fend off enemies. And there's different people, different collections, because there's so many different collections in Yuga now. But all right, let's shift into, I saw you did an article for Business Insider and it relates. What 3 tips would you give brands looking to enter the metaverse and Web3?
I mean, the metaverse doesn't yet exist. That's what I said in the article, and I still stand by that. We have a lot of virtual worlds. I mean, going back to what you just said, Yuga Labs, right? I mean, other side is a virtual world. It's not yet a metaverse. I know one of my dear friends, Tony Parisi, over at Lamina One, who's works directly with Neil Stephenson, the originator of the word metaverse in Stoke Crash. They're working on, they just put out a white paper that's basically talking about, what we need to get there. And there is so much work to be done, so much infrastructure, so much tech, so much in the cloud side of it. It's years. And, that's why I say, like, we need to be building the rails to get there. So these NFT projects are part of that. Some will succeed, some will fail, but the failures will ultimately, help build that sort of vision of what that can be, and we can learn from those failures. So, the first tip is, really brand values. What are your brand values? If you're a brand, what are your values, right? Do you care about family? Is that like your core value? Are you caring about, faster, cooler, better? What is that value that you're really looking to bring forth? And then understanding, from a storytelling perspective, what does it mean to be that, right? Like, do you live your brand? Do you live your values? Because, I mean, the word brand, it's just lost so much meaning, because, like, we could call religion a brand, right? I could say Christianity is a brand. Do you live by your Christian value set, right? Do you live by a Muslim value set? Do you live by a Jewish value? Like, that's your brand, your identity, right? So people have these brand identities connected to their ideology. You are the character, right? So you are a portrayal of that brand. So once you live within that sort of brand, how do you have that characteristics? That's where we're going towards a metaverse, right? Like, if you're creating a brand, what does Nike mean? Like, just do it. Okay, we all know that. So does it mean, like, get up off the couch and don't be lazy? Is that the brand? Like, we're combating laziness, we're being active, those kind of things. Well, what does that mean in a character? Who do you see as being active? Is that someone like Spider-Man? Is Spider-Man, active? Does he always jump to the rescue? Is he a doer and not a sayer? Like, those kinds of things are really important when it comes to understanding sort of large scale lore, scope, and connective tissue. Because one of the challenges so often is brands like misalign themselves. Now they align themselves with all these influencers. Well, who the fuck are these influencers? Yeah. Right? Like, what are they about? Like, to me, influencer is the biggest garbage dump. It's a flaming pile of crap. Because at the end of the day, influencers are only doing what they can get to get likes and to make money. So it's like, how are they influencing? And most of the time it's through titillation and virality, right? Doing things that are stupid, looking hot and sexy. I could go on about that. It's problematic.
And no, it's a pay to play game, man. A lot of it is a pay to play game, and the brands that are willing to just give money to these influencers who have built up these accounts by God knows what you're saying, exploiting themselves or just being stupid and people love it, or talking about controversial shit that built their community and then they pivot away from it and then they change their persona completely. Like, you don't know. It's just looking at a follower count and an engagement count and saying, hey, I'll give you 15K for a post. It's like, what are we doing? Like, why are we giving these people so much money? They're not doing anything thoughtfully. They're influencing based on something that they're receiving, like you're saying. It's not influence. It's simply a service for payment. That's it.
It's prostitution. I mean, it's, it's pretty, we've got to this point in our society where ultimately, everybody is selling their soul, selling their body for that 15 minutes of fame. It's not even 15 minutes of fame. It's like what Warval talked about, right? Like everyone wants their 15 minutes. Well, we had that with reality television. All of a sudden, any Joe Schmo who had no skill at all, but was willing to be stupid. I mean, you don't even know the amount of people that came through when I was working at Fifth Wheel. Like I was living in New York. Yeah. I was the casting camera at Fifth Wheel, shooting all that stuff. You remember that show, like where the stupid little wheel was spinning, so all the people that got interviewed, I was the one doing those interviews. The stupid shit people did to get on TV, it was insane. And I'm just going, what? I mean, nothing against it. Nothing against the show. I laughed my ass off. I mean, I am guilty as charged. But those kinds of things where I felt like people are just selling themselves to get some sort of feeling of meaning in their lives. And they believe that the media gives them meaning, and it's sad. And I think we're there right now. And I got a 12-year-old son, it worries me because of the bullying, because of, the non-doxed accounts of, what happens. It's on Instagram, but like it's a private account. How do we when we were kids, I mean, I don't know how old you are, but I'm 43 right now. So when I was a kid, obviously you turned off your social media, your social group was you hanging out with your friends, playing with your G.I. Joes, running around in the forest, playing guns, driving quads, just playing kickball. You got to turn off.
Being a kid.
Yeah, being a kid and kids that.
Yeah. No, they don't. They don't.
So fast, so hard. And I just, that's my concern. And it's like, I really want my son to not lose that wonder because I haven't lost it. Like, I'm still a kid. When I'm writing comic books, I'm like, I'm 12 years old again, watching Daredevil, fight Demogorgon, It's fun, man.
I think the problem is we're just too connected. It's such a fast world, and we're so connected digitally, like you're saying, with so many advancements now that everybody wants to put on this persona and feel validation from the world. You know what I mean? And they're willing to do that in so many ways and experience so many things virtually, but then they get disconnected from like the real world. Like maybe I feel like one day I just want to take my family to like a cliffside in Europe or somewhere around the world in the Middle East and just raise my kid there, man. When you're 18, when you're like ready to get into the bullshit that this world offers technologically, like who knows where the world's going to be at that point, really? Like who knows where the world will be at that point? But it's a scary thought.
I just think, the hardest thing is to find balance. I think that's the biggest thing. And when you're sitting in a space where there's constant information, constant entertainment, things like TikTok, where you just keep getting dopamine. You just keep getting that hit. I mean, talk about drugs. Like now we're a psychological drug. And what's going to happen now that, you can have a chat bot that is an influencer that you feel like you're talking to. Wait a second. Like that's to me, like that's the worst thing possible. And I have friends that are like, oh my God, it's going to be so incredible. Like we can launch our AI but the problem is, think about it like this, right? There's the really pretty girl in school and you talk to her, but you're always talking to her through text. You never like actually interact with her. And then ultimately she's always writing to you and making you feel so good. And one day you'll get your chance to go up and say hi to her. And she's like, who the hell are you? Like that's the reality when these real influencers are going to have all these real relationships with all these real people. And then you're never going to have it there. That was the warning in her. Like we have these warning signs. No one's paying attention. That's the scary part. Everybody's just, oh, how do we 10X? It's like, no, man.
It's important. It's important for people like us. I would call us maybe counter influencers. Like we're the defluencers. And like I see that you've been touring like the world, Saudi Arabia to Amsterdam, speaking at conferences, talking about building bridges in Web3, like joining the creative culture, but without this influencer market. Like what events have you touched on, what topics, and what's coming up in terms of that?
Yeah, I mean, it was really incredible to go around the world and kind of, talk about this, because every place obviously is so different. I mean, Amsterdam to Saudi Arabia, right? To Jeddah. I mean, like, you couldn't be more sort of diametrically opposed two places.
Right.
But to that point, it really comes back down to who are the people? We're all humans trying to find our voice in this world and trying to have meaning and trying to share our stories and trying to share our culture and wanting to share our culture. And, I kind of fell in love with Jeddah when I went there. I mean, I was there for such a short time, but, and the Middle East, I just have this connection. And I think it's such a beautiful place. And I think we're not getting to see the real stories. We're not getting to see the real Middle East. Here in America, we don't get that. And it's problematic to me. And I really believe that new technologies will allow for new stories and new opportunities and new connections. And the most important thing really is we need to all connect at a human level. And maybe AI will be a part of that interconnected tissue. I don't know. I mean, because in the sense of like AI as a sort of model of creating things and telling stories, I don't see that, it's more of a tool, and blockchain and these emerging technologies. But the other day, it's the stories. And, how do we connect these stories and experiences? How I feel, here I am on Zoom, and you and I are talking. This is the first time we've met. We're having this really in-depth conversation, getting to know each other, and these are these incredible tools that we have, Zoom and videos and this and that we now have, that we can talk to people around the world. I have wonderful relationships that I've made in Jeddah after having left. I mean, I was there for 48 hours and I made more like deep connections in that short amount of time and continued them, and same with Amsterdam and same with, the Netherlands, I mean, it's amazing. And that to me has been the greatest thing. And I think I am very fortunate to be able to do that because I'm able to travel. I have a voice, I have a platform. I'm, creating stuff. I'm, working with large IP like Marvel and companies like Sideshow. But I want to have the fans be able to connect around the world. I want someone in Jeddah to be able to connect to someone in Amsterdam. And it's about, that connection of their fandom and really getting to know each other and getting to know each other at a human level and their hopes, dreams, their fears, their loves, their experiences. Like that's what we need to be focusing on, not the frothy BS, like, so that to me is what excites me. And I want to keep doing it. And I want to keep, telling stories. But at the end of the day, I am using my platform to build experiments and to build opportunities to ultimately bring in new storytellers. Like that's my goal and dream, to build a studio where we can have storytellers from around the world have access to new technology and new tools and new ways, but learn the traditional methods of storytelling, learn about mythology, learn about and relate it to their culture, relate it to my culture, relate it to your culture, and find those touch points and start building new myths. That's what we need now more than ever.
It's amazing. And I would love to stay connected. I'd love to learn how to, me and Rami are working on a bunch of things. Storytelling is a huge component of what we want to do. So maybe we connect after this and do that. That'd be awesome. To wrap it up, I'd love for you could just, whatever you're working on, projects like whatever you're working on right now. Wriglin, there's an ebook that you're minting. Explain your project.
Yeah, well, I'd love to talk about Wriglin because, it was a project that I started in the traditional Hollywood system. Originally was developing it as an animated series. First was talking with Cartoon Network, then pitched to Disney and DreamWorks. Everybody loved the project and I knew I was onto something, but it was like too large in scope and I hadn't really figured out what I needed. There were still a lot of moving parts. So I pivoted to write it as a book. I'd never written a middle grade book before. I was like, you know what, I'm just going to try this. And this was before I got into writing. It was after I had done Masters of the Sun, but before I started really writing the Marvel universe. And then the pandemic happened. I went back and decided I was going to rewrite the whole book. I just rewrote it from scratch. And that's the draft that exists right now. I was like, you know what? I was writing Werewolf by Night. Tab and I were working on that project. And I was like, I was going to rewrite it. So I rewrote the book. And then Werewolf by Night spun up. All the Marvel stuff started happening again. So I put it on the shelf. And I got reached out to by Paco, CEO of SoulType. And I was already familiar with Solana, had worked on a project on the Solana blockchain, still have one there, animation project. And, I was like, look, this sounds really great. I think Solana is a great, incredible blockchain. There's a lot of opportunity for scalability with gaming and all sorts of other things, but to me, again, building a story from scratch and the ground up is the key. You need to have a piece of IP, so to speak, to launch those ships. So I said, look, let's do it. And he said, okay, I want to launch it as your collection. So we originally were targeting like around January, February. We pushed it to April. So it's out there. It's minting live right now. But what to me is so exciting about this project is I said, I'm going to mint the book that I wrote that is not perfect. It is the writer's draft. It is wordy. It's got spelling mistakes. There's grammatic. I missed things. There was a character that I'm going to cut the whole prologue. But what I wanted to do in doing that was show the process and show this is me exposed and I'm willing to put something out that is not perfect, letting you know as a writer, as an artist, that it shouldn't be perfect. It's okay to dump out that first draft and let people that you consider your sort of family or build a family around to be your beta testers. Let's read it. Let's look at it. Let's explore it, right? And I'm going to edit it in public, so to speak, but really in private because it's a gated community on the SoulType Discord. So it's this Storyverse channel on the SoulType Discord. So when you mint your Raken collectible, there's 1,001, 141 uniques. There is a one of one that is literally you. There is only the one, the Codex Discreet. So whoever gets that, you rock. I've only minted some rares and commons, but I love them. Don't get me wrong. I have that bit of FOMO myself. I'm like, I just want to mint them all, but I have to leave the collection there for others. There's been some amazing, the artwork, what was really cool about it, talking about AI, the artwork was generated in Midjourney utilizing the text that I wrote in the book. So it's all from characters, all from scenes, all from elements that's actual text in the book. And then was cleaned up by an artist to, make it ready for minting. So it's a very unique project. No one's done anything like this. And what excites me the most is that I'm going to use Sudowrite. I had talked to the folks over there a while ago. I have an OpenAI developer. We have, the APIs, and I've been working with the GPT-4. So I was kind of playing with that. But, I'm looking at Sudowrite, maybe some other writing software, AI writing software, and seeing how that helps. Because a lot of young writers, even older, and I mean young in the sense of it doesn't matter your age, but I mean beginning writers, novice writers, right? One of the hardest things is editing. One of the hardest things is staying on track with your story, really weaving it together. And I think, that's where AI tools will be really very helpful. And I think we'll get writers to a place where they can get it to a working manuscript that can be submittable to the publishers or to agents or to whomever. And ultimately at a fraction of the cost of hiring an independent editor, potentially, or getting it to a place where they can get it and then hire that independent editor, get the book more polished, and then submit it. And that's where a trajectory of digital and physical really comes into play, because I really love the bridge between digital and physical. And I think we can curate a fandom with the community, build the book, and then you can have an existing community to then launch your career as a writer, as a creative, and do it in a way where it's, you've almost kind of gated yourself and got it to a good place. So when you come up to that gatekeeper, it's going to be the best possible version it can be. And that's what I want to show people, how to do that.
That's awesome, man. I love, just before we wrap it up right now, like you touched on how imperfection, you released the imperfect copy, and it makes me think of art and like how imperfect art usually sells really high. And like Nike would release a product, couple 100,000 products, and one of them is defective. One of them is imperfect. And that is the one that is the most expensive in the whole collection. And it's interesting. It's all supply, it's all scarcity, man. So Ben, I really appreciate it, man. It was an awesome conversation. Thank you for all your perspectives. That's definitely keep in touch. And I'm going to definitely involve you in a few projects that I got working on where I need some storytelling. And honestly, I just need a creative mind like yours aboard.
That sounds rad, Mo. Well, look, Robbie, thank you guys so much. You got my info. Let's link up. You got my email. Let's link up on some emails. I'm better on that than I am on Telegram. Telegram, I'm like,